Okay, so in the last video, we demonstrated how to create a prefab. Basically, you created an object in the scene, you add various components to it, and then you drag it from the scene into the asset area. It is now a prefab, and it can now be instantiated by other objects while the game is running. So, up to this point, what we've done is we've had the prefab be instantiated at the bottom of the screen and then travel up. The traveling up was accomplished by gravity. What we're going to do now is we're going to have it spawn along the right side and travel to the left, kind of like old school side-scrolling shooters like Gradius. So that means we can't use gravity because it's traveling right to left instead of up and down. And second of all, we need to change which coordinate is being represented by a variable because we want to change the height. So we're changing the y coordinate, not the x. And lastly, since we're going to have things spawning up and down, we're probably going to have to move our camera. So let's do that first. Let's go to our main camera and set it to 4:4. And also we're going to have a more narrow range. So I was testing it in between videos. So what you're going to want to do is set the camera to 4:4 and then go to game flow. And I'm using a more narrow range, 1 through 7 rather than 1 through 10. So you can just change that to 7. Now what we're going to do is we're going to flip these. So rather than having the x be the variable, we're going to have y be the variable. We're going to have it spawn at say 8. We want it to spawn on the screen originally just to make sure it's working, but then when it's done, we'll have it spawn off the side of the screen. And this will change to spawn x. So now the name is a little bit misleading because it's the y coordinate. Fortunately, Microsoft Visual Studio shows you every place that it's being used in this script. So if you did want to change it to spawn y, you certainly could. So let's run that just to make sure that's working. So again, we changed the fact that the random range is 1 through 7. We switched the x and the y coordinates. So it's using a variable for the y. And the b itself, the prefab, we're going to get rid of gravity because we don't want it to move up or down. We want it to move left or right. Good. So now what we're going to do, now we need to rotate. And unfortunately, this isn't going to look pretty, but it's how you get it done. So right now we just said use the rotation of the prefab. So the prefab is represented by B enemy. So just use its own rotation. So there's a couple things you could do. You could change the rotation of the prefab to begin with, but you really don't learn anything if we do that. So in other words, you could take this, you could just change the rotation, but what if you need to do other rotations later? So for instance, you could do rotation and it would be on the Z axis. So you could do that. But like I said, if it turns out that you need to make something rotate different ways, like maybe you wanted to go right to left, now you want to go left to right, well, you can't keep coming here and changing this during the runtime. You need to do it using code. So let's see how to do that. So let's set that back to 0. We'll come back to our script, and we're going to change this to quaternion. Euler. When you see Euler, that's referring to basically you're rotating it. So even though it's saying angle, you're really rotating an object by an absolute amount. In other words, regardless of what its current rotation is, you're saying this is the new rotation. So you're not adding this rotation, you're simply saying this is the override. And it's new vector 3 because you can rotate it on 3 axes, even though it's a 2D object. So 0, 0, 90, as we just demonstrated. And we need one more parenthesis for the whole thing. Again, Visual Studio highlights the matching parentheses so you know that you have enough. So, like I said, it looks messy, but unfortunately, it gets the job done. So again, you're saying this is the rotation. Have it be a 0 rotation for X, 0 rotation for Y, and 90 degrees. So you'll see that it's going to accomplish the same task as having come up here and change the rotation on the prefab. So again, yes, if every time this spawns, if it's only going to spawn here, then absolutely you can change the rotation here. But if you're going to need it to spawn in different rotations, then you're going to want to learn how to do it via code. But now you've seen it both ways. Okay, so that's almost everything. The only thing that's really left now is to add movement again of it going right to left. And that's accomplished by accessing the rigid body 2D component and applying velocity. So let's look at how we're going to do that. So we're going to add a script and attach it to the B prefab. So right click, create, C#, and we'll call this bcon, short for B control. We'll take our B, and we're going to attach our bcon to it. And what we're going to do is we now open that up. And in bcon, we are going to give it instructions. So I mentioned that start, as this indicates, gets executed only when the object is initialized, okay? So if the object is already on the screen when the game begins to run, that's its initialization. But if an object gets spawned 20 minutes into the game, that's its initialization. So start isn't just the start of the game or the start of the scene. Start is whenever the object gets created. And since objects can be created throughout the runtime of the game, it's important to note that start isn't start of the game necessarily. It's when the object gets created. So now we'll delete that, now that we reviewed that again. And in the start, we're just going to add velocity. So GetComponent, and yes, people always point this out to me. I do know that GetComponent tends to be resource intensive. However, I think this is a good starting point because this indicates exactly what you're doing. Because as I mentioned, if you look at the prefab, add components. So it's not a coincidence that this is called GetComponent. You are modifying one of those components. Okay, well, which component? Well, the rigid body 2D component. Again, that's the name of the component. If you come back here, sorry for jumping around, you come back here to the inspector. It's a component, rigid body 2D component. And now we're going to, oops, sorry. We're going to apply velocity equals new vector 2, since we're only moving in 2 directions, and it's going to be like, say, a -2 and 0. So x -2 because we want to move it from right to left, and 0 because we're not having it move up and down. Okay, let's run it. There we go. It's not moving very fast, and it also is not accelerating. So that's something to keep in mind, is that this is a steady speed, not an acceleration. You would need to use much more complicated velocity statements where maybe the velocity changes over time or you continue to add force, but I don't want to get that complex. I just wanted to show you the next iteration of this. And really the last thing is we'll go back to game flow. And like I said, we ultimately really want this to spawn off the side of the screen. So let's change it to like 11. So again, what's being instantiated, where it's being instantiated, and the object's rotation. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, it's still actually spawning. We could go a little bit further, but All right, so that should about do it for this tutorial, I believe. So if there's anything else you want to see, just let me know. Just leave a like, leave a comment as to what else you'd like to see. And so I believe that should do it.